They let me have crutches. I told them I cannot speak without notes. But wasn't that amazing? Like, every one of those were so beautiful. Following a Olympic 4-time gold medalist. I don't know how that works, but I want to talk about spiritual intelligence. And we did this presentation at Google last year on spiritual intelligence, and we talked about, everyone's talking about IQ and EQ, but how about SQ? How about spiritual intelligence? And we started talking to the people who are in the information gate about higher learning, higher thinking. And we told them, there's 200 of them present, and they webcasted it through their entire Google company. And we started talking to them about the fact that we were designed to think tri-dimensionally. And yet most of us only think dual-dimensionally. And I was thinking about this myself, like, I think that even leaders, even Christian leaders, even church leaders, and Christian business leaders often relegate themselves to just two-dimensional thinking. That we think through the intellect, we think through our emotional intelligence, and yet God has actually called us to live and think tridimensionally. And actually, the greatest dimension of thinking is actually the spiritual dimension of thinking. Because remember, Hebrews says that the things that are visible were actually created by things that aren't seen. So actually, the unseen world, the world that we don't perceive naturally in our natural man, is actually where everything's actually sourced from. It's the root of everything. So sometimes when we're only thinking dual dimensionally, sometimes we're not thinking of actually root causes and root situations. We're actually thinking about the fruit, but not the root. And so I want to talk a little bit about tri-dimensional thinking. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 23, Paul says, be renewed, get this part, in the spirit of your mind. And by the way, this is a little side note, but I actually think that this whole idea of teaching people that there is a third dimension to thinking, I think we're going to learn how to solve diseases, some mental illnesses that are actually unperceived because we're treating only two dimensions. And I actually believe that there are some people who are sick in the third dimension of their mind. I'm not talking about an evil spirit. I believe in evil spirits, and I do believe that evil spirits affect people's minds. I'm talking about the third dimension of their mind. Actually, the third dimension of their mind, there's something wrong with it. It's sick, and I think we're going to find that schizophrenia and some of these diseases that have been uncurable are actually going to become curable as we begin to access God's thinking in the area of actually how do we heal the third dimension of some people's minds. So Paul says, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And so he's talking about that there's a dimension of our minds that we can actually be renewed in, that we can proactively tap into that one place and renew that place in our minds. And I really think this is where we're going in the whole innovation. And we're in the information age, so how many know whoever controls the information gate controls the world? And we're seeing that, social media and everything that's coming out, and now we have AI, automated reasoning, all these kind of things that are kind of getting scary. And how many know we need to get in there with another dimension of thinking and begin to answer questions no one's able to answer. In fact, some people not even asking those questions. In the 1 Samuel chapter 16, there's the story that you're probably familiar with of Samuel, the prophet, going to Jesse's house to find a king. Do you remember the story? And he knows he's supposed to go to Jesse's house, and he gets to Jesse's house, and Jesse seems to have 7 sons. We know he has an 8th son, but he seems to have 7 sons, and so the prophet marches the sons in front of him, and he sees Eliab, who's the oldest, and the Bible says that he's head and shoulders, he's 6 to 8 inches taller than everyone. He looks kingly, and he gets the oil, and he's about to anoint Eliab king. And the Lord goes, Samuel, don't look as man looks. In other words, Samuel's thinking from EQ and IQ. He's thinking, this guy looks intelligent. He seems like he's got it all happening. He's got charisma. He looks like the people's choice. And God goes, you're thinking from the wrong dimension. Tap into another dimension. Tap into the dimension I gave you. Tap into the dimension that you have a corner on right now. And so he marches the other 6 sons in front of him, and he seems to not have been at the right house. And he says to Jesse, are these all your sons? I'm sure he's thinking, maybe I got this prophetic thing wrong. Maybe it's not Jesse's house. Maybe it's Jackson's house, you know? And it started with the J. I'm pretty sure it was, is there another Jesse, you know? And of course, we know that Jesse says, well, I have one other son. He's out with the sheep. And so he says, well, go get him. And as he calls him, the story is that David is running towards the house, and the Bible describes him as handsome and ruddy. Actually, the connotation in the Hebrew is, he doesn't look keenly. And God goes, that's the guy I chose. And by the way, I'd like to remind you that David, in the Psalms, he says, I was conceived in sin, and on sin I was brought forth. David was the illegitimate son of Jesse, which is the reason why Jesse didn't bring him to the inauguration. He didn't want the prophet to know that he had an illegitimate son. And God goes, that illegitimate son, he's the one I've chosen. Which tells us again that God doesn't think like we think. And I love that part. It's important that we start to train ourselves. So like, how do I tap into this? What do you actually, are you saying? Like, you know, like, okay, it's nothing's coming, you know, nothing's coming. And first of all, I want to say, we simply, first of all, have to press in to, let me read it to you what I wrote. We have to train ourselves to think tridimensionally. You'll have to press past the temptation to accept the outward and or the obvious as the only solution. Let me say that oftentimes the reason we don't press in to the tridimensional, the SQ, is because there seems to be an IQ or an EQ answer. There seems to be an ELIB. Like there always seems to be an ELIB. It's like, I see ELIB and I go, okay, I'm not going any further. And I think that I call it the spiritual power pause. Like sometimes we have to go, oh, maybe it's not ELIB. It seems like it should be obviously, he looks like a king. The people want him to be king. It's probably ELIB. But sometimes I have to just stop for a minute and say, but is that God's answer? What I'm getting at is sometimes we don't tap into it because we just don't do the power pause. We just go, listen, I got 100 things to answer today, and there's an answer. No one else has had one, at least I have one. And then we don't think, well, maybe that's not God's answer. So we have to remind ourselves that there is an answer. And the second thing is, we have to tap in we have to actually take the next step and begin to tap into the gifts that the Lord's given us. And I would remind you of the gifts of the Spirit and the mind of Christ. These are dimensions of the Spirit that we just have to take a minute to tap into and realize that we actually have access to them. So first, we have to remember, like, the obvious answer may not be the answer. And secondly, we have to remind ourselves, I actually have access to another dimension. I mean, I have to actually stop and say, wait a second, let's access the other dimension. In Exodus chapter 31, it's a favorite story of ours around here. It was the guy who was first filled with the Spirit in the entire Bible was named Bezalel or something like that. It says that he is filled with the Spirit in wisdom, understanding, and knowledge for craft to craft arts, designs in gold and silver and bronze. I mean, this guy was anointed with the Spirit to do practical things. It looked like what he was doing came from IQ and EQ, but he was actually tapped into SQ, and he was doing stuff in a way no one's ever seen before because he was tapped into a source no one ever tapped into before. And here's what I'm going, like, he was doing practical stuff through a spiritual dimension. Let me say that one more time. He was doing practical stuff, carving. I mean, how many people tap into God for carving? At least beyond the natural gift I have. And this guy was tapping in to get designs. It says he was getting designs from a spiritual dimension. That's pretty amazing. Years ago, Bill was teaching us when the first year that I met Bill, he did a series on the gifts of the Spirit and actually taught us about the 9 gifts of the Spirit in 1 Corinthians 12 and 14. And we were learning about words of knowledge, and we were a very small church at the time. When Bill came to Weaverville, we were 40 people. And we had a day service, And then as we started growing, we had a night service, and the night service was more like activation. So we would learn something, then we would try it on each other. And so we were learning like words of knowledge, like how to get a word of knowledge, and we were practicing on each other. And at the time, I had an automotive repair shop, and I was the diagnostician. I was the guy who diagnosed the problems. This is the early years of computers. And it was very, very difficult because most guys were mechanics and not technicians because of what we grew up in. And so we would get some really, really tough cars to fix, and there wasn't a lot of equipment in those days to fix those cars, and not a lot of background on how to actually fix those cars. And so I had this particular truck that belonged to Sierra Pacific, which was my largest account. They had 22 trucks, and they were in all the time. And they had towed this truck in on a Friday, and I'd spent all day. It wouldn't start. I'd spent all day trying to get it to start. And I actually got the dealer on the phone, spent 2 hours with the dealer checking everything. They actually faxed me a whole diagram of the wiring diagram. I had been through the whole thing. I literally went back Friday night, spent all Friday evening trying to fix it. They needed it for Monday. Worked on it Saturday, could not fix it. Bill did this message on word of knowledge. We did some practice on Sunday night. And Monday morning, I woke up with that, that knot in your stomach, like you have something you had to fix, but you don't know what to do. And so I was like, maybe I should just have it towed to the dealer. I don't know what else to do. And I just had this thought, I wonder if words of knowledge work on trucks. It was really more of desperation than it was inspiration. And so I decided to leave the truck till evening when everyone left. And that night, I like what we did in words of knowledge when we practiced is we laid hands on each other and got words of knowledge. So I'm like, well, maybe I should lay hands on the truck. So I laid hands on the truck, and immediately I get this idea. There's a diode under the right fender. The wires broke. Now, no diagram showed a diode in the right fender. And so therefore I had not looked. I took it up in the air, and underneath a whole bunch of, the covering, the black tar they spray in there, the undercovering, undercoat. I looked, and there was a wire broke. I soldered the wire together. The truck started right up, and from there on, I made money off the word of knowledge. And I figured out there was actually nothing I couldn't fix because the Holy Spirit actually knew all about cars also. I want to finish with just challenging you. The tough decisions don't come, the easy decisions don't come to my desk. The black and white, this is right, wrong, those don't come to my desk. Maybe they come to yours. They seldom come to my desk. The things that come to my desk are things that people have already tried to answer with IQ and EQ. And we are tasked as leaders with answering the questions no one else has been able to answer, and therefore we need to tap into a source no one else has been able to tap into. So I want to propose that we as leaders begin to tap into the source that we exclusively have as believers and show the world that there is an answer in God for every single question they have. God bless. Thank you so much.